Welcome back to my Newgrounds docu-series. Today we're going to talk about the many animations that spawn from the site. This episode will be the same as the last one, where it leans towards some of the stuff that I remember from the site, but it's also going to include stuff that's well established and popular. Legendary Frog is one of the biggest OG Flash creators on Newgrounds, and was one of the most popular Flash artists during the golden age of Flash in the 2000s. He got his start on the site back in 2002, and was uploading content on a regular basis up until 2018, where he hasn't uploaded anything on the site since. These are a prime example of how Flash influenced internet humor in the early years. These animations were all parodies of popular games and movies, with references to early 2000s memes. With his video game parodies, Legendary Frog's animations were pretty ahead of the times, as he was one of the first internet content creators to go for that kind of humor, with in-jokes that only fans of video games would understand. He has a distinct art style that, when I think of a classic old-school Flash animation, I usually think of something like this: hard lines and kinda jank movement. There was a pretty clear increase in quality from his first animation up to his last one, but it still kept the same style with hard lines and simple shapes. Some people criticized his art style over the years, but it didn't amount to much that hindered his success. Most of his parody animations won awards, and users would often flock to his account whenever there was a new one uploaded. In 2011 though, Legendary Frog stopped uploading parody animations and became a member of an animation group called Toonedworks. He worked on the animated series Wonders of the Universe and Lloyd up until 2018, and he hasn't worked on anything for the site since. Nowadays, he hosts a Dungeons & Dragons podcast on his YouTube channel. So this was a series I was into back in the day, but I had completely forgotten about it for years until I just randomly remembered it while I was making this episode. It was created by a user named Alvin Earthworm back in 2006, and it ran from then up until it got cancelled in 2009, but then it came back again as a reboot in 2016. The show follows Mario and Luigi in the Mushroom Kingdom when suddenly a being known as Hyper Mecha Sonic shows up looking for the Chaos Emeralds. I was a pretty big Mario fan by this point, and I was familiar with the Sonic games too. I played some of the classic Sonic games and some of the newer games like Sonic Colors and Generations. The show was pretty ridiculous, but in like a fun kind of way. All the fights were really over the top, and the tone was very much like anything can happen. So it was fun to see someone just take an idea and run with it. The show was made using sprite animation, which was a popular subgenre of animation in Flash, where they'd take the pixelated sprites from classic 2D games and use them for their own Flash creations. These were usually parody animations, like Sonic for Hire, which is another great sprite animated show, but this was an actual narrative show with its own story. Sprite animation was actually starting to become less popular when this was being made, but it still managed to be a well-received show, and as I said, it was popular enough to get a revival in 2016, so the series was one of the exceptions in that sense. Also, just as an aside, there was a bit of a trend with having Mario and Sonic Olympic Games crossovers for a while in the 2010s. The first one was the 2008 Beijing Summer Olympics, which was 2 years after the first episode of this series, so maybe it had a little something to do with that. I used to have the DS version of the 2010 Winter Olympics one, and that game was a certified classic. Anyway, that was just something this series reminded me of. This series. I mean, do I even need to introduce it? Most everybody who's heard of Flash had almost definitely seen or heard of this series. Created by David Firth, who goes by Doki on Newgrounds, this series is one of the most unique things ever created in Flash. It follows this weird green guy named Salad Fingers who lives in a house in the middle of a wasteland as he does all these weird, disturbing things. I'm sorry if I say weird a lot in this segment, but it's really the only word I can think of for this series. In some episodes he ends up accidentally killing someone. There's a whole thing with a dead body that he thinks is someone in his family. And there's even a plot where he sees his maybe dead mother in a mirror, and his evil twin who he refers to as Glass Brother. The series is a weird Mageddon where you don't know what the next episode is going to be, and it keeps you guessing as to what's really going on, because it seems like there's no logic to any of it. The first episode became hugely popular across the internet not long after it went up. The small but growing community of people who browsed the internet for entertainment back then were passing the video among each other, and it was a big part of what defined early internet culture. David Firth created a 20th anniversary episode back in July of 2024, where it was made to look like the old school Flash animation of the early episodes. He's also just released another episode this year, so the series is still going strong after all this time. As I'm writing this, it's coming up to Halloween soon, so if you want to watch something to get in the mood, this is a good choice. This was an interesting series, as it was actually inspired by the Newgrounds logo itself. Back in 2006, the logo for the site was being replaced. The new logo was a redesign of the old one made by Johnny Utah, who has since become a member of the staff at Newgrounds, and also works at the Behemoth with Tom Fulp. After he made the redesign, he decided he wanted to make a series about the Tankman, and in June of 2006, he released the first of the Tankmen series. The series followed a group of soldiers in a post-apocalyptic world where they were in a war with these other soldiers that wore pointy helmets. And that's basically the only difference between the two. Not very often was there fighting though, as the characters seemed more interested in making jokes about their junk, but every so often there was a conflict between parties. Like one episode where they were chased by actual Mad Max bandits, accents and all. It was obvious that Johnny Utah was inspired by Mad Max with the whole post-apocalyptic desert thing, so it's cool he acknowledged it in that little bit. Another episode was taken off Newgrounds because it had an unedited clip from Titanic in it, which I obviously won't show here. All the episodes are pretty good. The series has a kind of dry sense of humor that was well received, and the series has a ton of awards on the site. There hasn't been any official episodes since about 2008, but there's been a ton of fan animations, and the characters have shown up in various media throughout the years. Most notably, they appeared in Friday Night Funkin', which only makes sense since that game seems to be all about bringing back old Flash creations like Pico and Madness Combat. And speaking of Madness Combat, this is just an awesome series. Created by Matt Jolly, aka Crinkles Online, this is a series that boasted some of the best action set pieces and bloody violence ever put to Flash. Just to give you some context, back in the 2000s, blood and violence wasn't too hard to find in Flash. In fact, it seemed most animations and games in Flash were designed to be exceptionally violent, because after all, this was all new at the time. There wasn't really any standards when it came to what could fly on the internet back then. So you had some pretty messed up and sick stuff being made. But most of it was still kind of crude looking, but then along came this series where not only was the violence exceptionally brutal, but it was all put together so well, and the main character, Hank J. Wimbledon, is like the ultimate death machine. All the action flows so well, and it actually gives some real Hollywood action movies a run for their money. It all comes together like a perfectly choreographed dance of death. So the plot of the series involves Hank being punched in the first episode, which for some reason sets everybody in the town out for his blood. From there, the series goes pretty off the rails right away, just in the first episode, as he gets in a fight with Jesus himself, fights multiple zombies, and then just dances around their corpses without a care in the world. As the series kept going, the violence kept being ramped up more and more, and the series introduced new characters for Hank to fight, like Tricky the Clown and the Auditor, as well as a few allies with Sanford and Deimos, who got their own episodes starting with episode 5.5. The series is one of the most beloved on the site, with it even getting its own day of celebration on the 22nd of September. There's been many games made that were inspired by this series, including Madness Interactive and Madness Project Nexus on Flash. Not the biggest fan of that one, but there is a newer version of it called Madness Project Nexus. Yeah, it's a bit confusing, but from what I've heard, this new game is pretty good, and it's available on Steam with overwhelmingly positive on its reviews. This is a series created by Adam Phillips, who goes by Clyde online, and back in the early days of the site, Clyde was a bit different from your average Newgrounds animator. It turns out Adam was actually an animator who'd worked for Disney back in the 90s, and when he came to Newgrounds, he had a pretty significant edge in terms of professional skill. His 11 years of experience as an effects animator made him quite familiar with the process of animating by the time he started working with Flash around the year 2000. And then in 2004, he released the first episode of his Brackenwood series. This series follows the exploits of this guy named Bitey, the last of the Dashkin. Yeah, I don't know what a Dashkin is either, but that's what he is, which makes him the fastest creature in all the Brackenwood, and by God, he makes sure to make it everyone else's problem. Most of the series sees him wandering this fantastical world and getting into trouble by harassing the creatures in it, but being that he's the fastest thing alive that isn't a blue hedgehog, he usually gets away with it. The series mixes sort of Looney Tunes style comedy with a fantasy world that seems like it was taken right out of a child's imagination. That doesn't mean the series doesn't have any darker moments though. The last episode explains the backstory of this world, and it's basically just a lore dump about who Bitey is and why he acts the way he does. I'm not going to spoil anything though, because I recommend you watch this one yourself. There's 6 main episodes in the series and they can all be watched in less than an hour, so if you're stuck for something to watch, definitely give this one a try. Over the years, this series has been embraced into the Newgrounds culture. The main character is often seen in fan art with the gang of iconic Newgrounds characters, including Pico, Alien Hominid, the Tankmen, and so on. So it seems like the series struck a major chord with people, and I agree that it's quite an achievement to have a series of this quality be such a big part of the site. Adam Phillips gave us something really special with this series. Nowadays, Adam works on a few different shows like Bob's Burgers, but he hasn't made any new Brackenwoods episodes in a while. There is talks that he may do more episodes in the future though, and possibly even a movie of it too, so we'll see what happens there. Michael Cusack is the greatest animator of all time. That's it. Nah, just kidding. Michael Cusack is one of the foremost animators in today's culture. He's one of the creators and starring voices of the hit show Smiling Friends. He started uploading animations to Newgrounds and YouTube in 2012. These are mostly short standalone pieces that aren't part of anything he's still doing now, but there were some that he's since made into bigger things, like the first 2 YOLO videos back in 2014 and the first Damo and Darren video. Of course, Michael Cusack's most popular series is undoubtedly Smiling Friends, which I should mention he also co-created with Zach Hadel, who is another Newgrounds originating animator, but outside of that series, Michael Cusack has a number of other shows he's made online. Damo and Darren is probably his most popular show prior to Smiling Friends. Not 100% sure though, so don't quote me. The series follows these 2 guys who are unemployed, and it's sort of like a comedy satire where they do everyday stuff, but their personalities always keep it interesting. It's pretty on the nose about its Australian roots too, as there's lots of Aussie slang, and there's an episode where they get chased by a furious demon Tweety Bird, otherwise known as an Australian magpie. Don't mess with those guys. Another good series he's made just recently is Crocodile and Cube, where these 2 guys try to make a song, and there's just weird and awkward situations that keep arising all the time. Michael Cusack's art style is really unique in that he combines things that are just simple shapes with other things that are more detailed. His characters vary in the amount of detail they have, and it's like there's different skill levels of drawing being applied to everything. The way he brings the art style together with the tone and humor of his animations just makes it endlessly entertaining to watch his stuff. So here's my section of honorable mentions of animations. Blah 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 blah. Bridge Kids is a recent series by Mike Karff and Nihaho on Newgrounds, and it's basically about a bunch of kids around a bridge. It kind of has a Kevin Smith View Askew-universe kind of feel to it, although the characters' designs are obviously exaggerated a lot. I like the art style and humor of the series, and the characters are fun to watch. Animator versus animation. This was another big series back in the day. It was basically a series about this little stick figure guy who didn't like the fact that his creator was torturing him, and so he decided to revolt, and he started to mess around with his computer. There's a few different iterations of this stick figure guy throughout the series. In the first episode he's just called Victim, but then later on there's another character called the Chosen One, and these animations were all really creative in how they were put together. They were created by a guy named Alan Becker. Each episode was an expansion and improvement in concept from the last one, and it eventually got to a point where he did animation versus Minecraft and animation versus YouTube. Ultimate Showdown of Ultimate Destiny was a music video by Alt F4 and Lemon Demon, where it was basically just an amalgamation of a bunch of pop culture characters that were relevant at the time, like Batman, Optimus Prime, Shaquille O'Neal, Godzilla, and of course, the god himself, Chuck Norris. Yeah, Chuck Norris was like the biggest meme on the internet back then. But it was a fun music video, definitely better than anything you'd see on MTV nowadays. So as I said in the first episode, Pico is huge on Newgrounds. There's been so many animations and art and just every kind of media you can think of about Pico that it would rival just about any movie, game, music, production studio's catalog of stuff that they've made. There was a cool animation called Pico vs. Zombies made by Sick Death Fiend, who is the same guy who did the art for Road of the Dead. This one allowed Pico to show off his skills at killing without having his PTSD come into play. But it does have a bit of a shock twist ending though. Pico's Time Tank is a fun action animation where Pico goes to different time periods using the Newgrounds tank that he finds in an alleyway for some reason. Pico Therapy is just insane. It's just like the most extra Pico animation you could possibly imagine. Like if there was an absolute Pico, it would be the Pico in this animation. There's of course the famous Pico's Unloaded by Mind Chamber, which is probably the most popular Pico animation on the site, where Pico faces off a bunch of Uber kids in a fight that kinda resembles the fight that Neo has with all the Agent Smiths in The Matrix. There was Pico Epilogue by Johnny Utah, which was very Johnny Utah in tone, but then that got followed up with Pico Epsilon, which is very different. There was Pico's Permission Slip, which is probably my favorite, as it shows the captain from the Tankmen series being Pico's dad, and it's pretty good. So I hope you enjoyed this exploration of the animations on Newgrounds. I hope you're inspired to go watch some of the stuff on the site, because this is all grade A animation, better than anything you'd see come from any multi-million-dollar animation studio. So join me in the next episode where I talk about the history of Flash as a piece of software. I'm going to cover the whole thing, so make sure you tune in next time for that one. Thanks again for watching.